Good afternoon. I'm J-Art's Executive Director, Laura Mandel, and it's great to be here with all of you for JLive. JLive is our new series of virtual cultural events that bring us together to explore and celebrate the diverse world of Jewish art, culture, and creative expression. We're bringing you bite-sized conversations with the best Boston area talent. Today, I'm excited to be with artist Ariel Freiberg, painter, educator, and wonderful J-Art's friend. You may remember her magnificent Hanukkah commission from the 2017 MFA Hanukkah celebration, which was called Ziv, and it was absolutely gorgeous, now living in the most beautiful window at Oratid. If you have any questions as Ariel speaks, please share them in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to as many of them as possible at the end. Please don't worry if you don't see the questions pop up. I have them. Now you are all in for a real treat. Ariel.
Thanks, Laura. Thank you, J-Arts. Thank you, everyone, for working behind the scenes. I'm an artist educator. I teach at Brandeis University. My primary medium is painting, and I explore the accelerators and breaks of sexuality and bodily transformation through gesture, movement, and color. Color is probably the main mark of my work, and I'm sourcing my color generally from the glam malls of Houston, Texas, where I grew up, the landscape of my grandparents' home in Ramat Gan in Israel, my family heritage, particularly the amulets or cameos from my Iraqi Jewish family. And so that's going to segue me into the work I have behind me here. So amulets were typically used as a way to ward off illness, evil eye, bad spirits, bad mojo, anything to ward off any corona-like things, if you will. And so the couple amulets I have here, these were fabricated in oil painting and then in cement. The cameos would have been pinned to a baby's bassinet, or maybe put underneath a bed, or maybe kept in someone's pocket, or pinned to their garment. And so the cameos were something that my family uses until this day, I would say. But they were something that were somewhat hidden from me because my family was refugees from Baghdad, and they escaped persecution in the 1950s to Israel. And they left Baghdad because there was a change in regime and political energies that basically took all the, put everyone that was a minority community, such as the Jews, on edge to the point where there was a big mass exodus, particularly in the 50s. So even though they weren't able to bring many things with them, a couple things they were able to bring were these cameos. So the cameo on my right, maybe your left, this one over here is actually fabricated with cement. My grandfather, when he lived in Baghdad, he had a fabric shop in the main market in central Baghdad. And in this fabric shop, he sold silks and tapestries, all sorts of fabrics for making garments. But then once they resettled in Israel and sort of found their footing, it took them as refugees about 8 years. He reinvented himself as a contractor, and his medium transformed from fabrics and silks into cement. So in order to explore a bit more about my family heritage, I started working with cement because I thought, well, how else could I reconnect with my grandfather, who's not with us anymore, but through his medium. And as much as I'm not really a builder, I thought I'm more of a painter. I thought, well, maybe I could paint with cement. So how I paint with cement, these panels are panels that you would put on the flooring or a wall in a bathroom or any kind of sort of wet room. And I've painted them with acrylic paints, and then take the quick dry cement and literally using my hands form the figures. So the two figures here are is based off of a photograph my grandfather took of his two daughters, my aunts, and they were probably about 13 in front of the beach in Jaffa in Israel. And then the camel is sort of the ubiquitous image of the Middle East. It's kind of how we think about it through products, cigarettes, chocolate, you name it. But then at the same time, it actually is part of my family story, as my grandfather's brother literally went with nomads on camels across the desert when he was making the trek to Israel. So rather than the airplane like the rest of my family took. That tells you a little bit about my work, and these pieces I made while I was at a residency last summer at Mass MoCA in Western Mass. Maybe I'll share a couple other works. So as we were all kind of facing this sheltering in place and trying to contend with this sort of constant blanket of worries, I was thinking about, well, how could I explore that more directly in my work? Because I felt like this urge and this urgency to connect with that in some way. And some other recent work that I've been getting into has been exploring the historical. This is a bit of a segue. Has been exploring the historical character of Salome, who was from the time of King Herod. She was the daughter of King Herod Antipas. So Salome, the narrative goes, the folklore is that she seduced King Herod, her stepfather, to kill John the Baptist, and she asked for his head on a charger or a big platter. So it was this narrative was essentially, apparently, according to all the historians, it was a purely fabricated narrative. Salome grew up to, had a full life. She didn't die as a teenager. She had children. There's even some biblical coins with her profile on it. So she lived a full life, but for some reason she became, from that time through the Renaissance all the way up until the 20th century, this sort of femme fatale. And I'm interested in how she transformed from that femme fatale into this feminist trailblazer as we know her today. And I've been exploring a range of medias that reproduce the narrative of Salome, including, film, Oscar Wilde, Titian, oil paintings. There's so many genres that tap into the image of and narrative of Salome. So segueing back to coronavirus timeland that we're in right now. So I'm just going to move this computer around, so bear with us. So this is a piece, it's a work in progress. Let's see, hopefully that's clarifying a bit now. A work in peace that's Salome drowning in her desires. So maybe you'll see some recognizable characters here. This image with the face palm is inspired by Dr. Fauci. Where it's unclear why he was necessarily putting his hand to his head, but that's usually what I do when I'm in a worried state. I have a tendency to touch my face. I was talking with my mom the other day and she said, oh, we touch ourselves as a way, we release certain hormones when we do that. And right now we're in this state where touch is so volatile and essentially problematic, particularly touching our faces. So there's a lot of face touching in this particular piece. And so we have Dr. Fauci, who's the sort of epitome of intellect and worry simultaneously occurring. There's sort of the all-American guy with his sunglasses, smoking a cigarette. And then there's Salome in her utter state of drowning in her worries. And so you can see that the colors are not naturalistic. It's the composition is invented. It's you know, one way to kind of tap into this, I guess, zeitgeist of the moment for me.
While you're on it, Ariel, I have a question. You had originally mentioned that the Angel of Death was in there, and I don't know, you said this is a work in progress. Can you tell us a little more?
Oh, yeah. So, well, the Angel of Death has kind of disappeared at the moment. It may resurrect. Yeah, I've been working on this painting, I guess, for the past 3 weeks or so, in between end of the semester things. It's definitely been in many stages, but even though there isn't the Angel of Death, there is a character up here in the far corner. I don't know if you guys can see it, but it's the headless person, because every Salome painting either has a head or a headless person with a rake. A rake is, you know, is an object that I think of as representing domestic spaces, but then also at the same time labor. And that relationship to this overwhelming worry is directly connected to our labors, the labors of everyone working together on the front lines, and those who are particularly vulnerable right now because of the way that this virus seems to behave. So that's kind of where things are with this particular painting. Maybe I can segue into another to share another piece with you guys. You're up for that? Okay, all right.
Yes,
so
please.
bear with me while I move this computer apparatus around. Okay, all right. So it will take a moment for this to come into focus. Okay. All right. So this painting, let's see if I can adjust that a little bit. Okay, so this painting is particularly ties back into my Baghdadi heritage. So one thing that I've contended with, being both American, both Israeli, Iraqi, is that persisting sort of sense of home and belonging, which has always been this like split or disconnection. And so this painting particularly, you can see that this figure, she's in this kind of impossible pose. Her like genitalia area is like this multicolored technicolor zone in this kind of pink world. The landscape is inspired particularly from an area in outside of Tel Aviv, near not too far from where my grandparents' house is. So there were new apartment buildings that were being constructed, and there was this whole field of orange trees that were uprooted and where they were doing this construction. And I was taking some photographs of this particular spot, and I noticed that there was a little olive tree that was growing amongst the garbage in this construction site. And so you'll notice that there's a little still life. Maybe if I bring this in a little bit closer, you'll be able to see. This brings a new relationship to Zoom, right? So hopefully it's showing up. But so there's these little bits of olive branches that were coming up amongst the sort of refuse. The landscape is almost in a technicolor, almost nuclear state. I was thinking of a sun that's so bright that it kind of blinds you. So, and then this figure again kind of plays into the narrative Salome, as this particular area is an area that is connected to King Herod and Salome's time. And also was interested in the relationship to the Me Too period, because the way that women tend to be the scapegoat for all sorts of baggage. So that was one way that this was sort of I guess, playing out, literally and figuratively in this particular painting.
I will just jump in and say what I really appreciate about this painting is if any of you have seen any of Ariel's other works, there's a feeling that's reminiscent, you know, with the gesture and the like. But I think the layers of your family story and history in there are really interesting. But going to the gesture piece, we actually have a question from the audience. Susan would like to know, can you talk a little bit more about the role that gesture plays in your paintings? And specifically, do you start with the gestures? Do you start with a concept? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the gesture, sometimes the gesture acts as a concealer or a self-censorship, or I see the gesture as being my hand versus the illusionistic image. But then sometimes the gesture is an expression of like a psychosexual energy. So like an energy that's like beyond, you know, censorship and more about like a revealing of an internal world. Sometimes I start with a gesture, and sometimes the gesture is the last thing that happens in the painting. A lot of times in painting, the way we read them is sort of our eye goes to the last place that the painter touched. So our eye kind of finds its way back through the painting from that last place to the broader marks. I hope that helps expand on that.
Definitely. And the other thing, I think this will have to be our last question because we're already running short on time. It's amazing how fast this goes. But you started out by referencing your use of color. And I know, being familiar with your work, that there's a lot of the kind of salmony pinks and a lot of teals. And you talked about sort of being inspired by the malls around you growing up. But can you tell us a little bit more about your use of color and whether there's meaning to the different colors and sort of how you deal with that?
Yes, yeah. So color, a lot of the colors that I'm using are sourced particularly from the emulets from my Baghdadi Jewish Iraqi family. So I'm actually going to remove, hopefully we can do this really quickly. I don't know if this is going to work. So this particular painting, you'll see the teals. This particular stone is actually, it's not stone, it's actually ceramic. So that teal is a really common color that would be attached to the emulets. Green, turquoisey stones are usually attached to the emulet. The emulet that's like a triangular sack would have been filled with snakeskin, and then it would have been wrapped in red fabric. So very vibrant colors, and always gold is attached to it. So the gold safety pin is also part of the amulet, even though, you know, usually we think of safety pins as throwaway things. They would make gold safety pins and so that's a big part of where the color is coming from. In addition to the glam malls of Texas. So.
That's great. I think next time we do this, Ariel, we're going to have you show us some of your process in painting with the cement, because I'm fascinated by this.
I would love to.
That would be great. All right, that will be round 2. Excellent. All right, I think we can do 30 more seconds because I think there's a few more questions. Someone is asking about the background on this painting. Can you talk to us a little bit about what looks like lace?
Yes, yeah. So I don't know how much it shows up in the Zoom world, but it is actually, it's based off of a baby's blanket, which is another craft that's really popular in Iraqi culture, is this sort of absence of material lace, where you would cut out a shape and then you would hem the interior of the cutout. So it's based off of that particular kind of lace. So that's a good eye.
It's beautiful. All right. Wow. This was wonderful, Ariel. I'm so appreciative to actually be able to see into your studio, even though I can't be there. So for all of you who are curious to know more about Ariel's work, she will actually have a show up at the Knizik Gallery at Brandeis, I think in November. Is that correct, Ariel?
I think so. Crossing for it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we'll send out information about that. Absolutely. Before we go, I just want to remind everyone that our first JLive food program kicks off this Friday, May 15th, with Avi Shem Tov. You may know him from Simcha, the modern Israeli restaurant in Sharon, and the Chubby Chickpea food truck. And the big news of the week is that he actually has a new restaurant concept that he's just announcing this week. So he'll tell us more about that. So please join back in on Friday at 4 o'clock for JLive Food. If you love what you've seen today, you can follow J Arts on Instagram and Facebook for more. That's at J Arts Boston. And of course, none of this happens without these incredible artists. And I hope that you will support the artists. I hope that you will consider giving to J Arts if this is something that feels really meaningful to you. And please keep sending questions because we will have Ariel answer and return in the future. So thank you, Ariel.
Thank you, Laura.
A round of applause.
Thank you, audience. Thanks, everyone out there.
All right. Have a great afternoon, everyone.